In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you the 7 common mistakes that I see people make in Revit all the time. So let's make sure we know about them so we don't make them in the future. Let's go. Now quickly, before we jump into Revit, I would just like to ask you to check out my website, balkanarchitect.com. I'm going to link it up in the cards above and then also down in the description of this video. If you're serious about learning Revit, that's definitely the best place to be, with over 140 hours of content dedicated to all of the interesting and complex topics inside of Revit. Okay, so now without any further ado, let's jump straight into Revit. Okay, and here we are in Revit, and as you can see, I have this Revit project, and the first mistake that I'm going to be talking about is going to be loading in families the wrong way. So when it comes to loading families into Revit, we have a couple of options. The first option is to go here to the Insert tab, and then let's go here to, okay, let's move the cat out of the way just a little bit. Okay, so you go here to load family, and then you can go and find the family on your computer. So in this case, on my desktop, and I can just hit open, and that's going to load it in. The second option is just to open up that folder just like this, and then to just drag over that family into the project. Now, I really preferred this approach for a long time, but it's actually wrong. While if you're using it the wrong way, it is wrong. So let me show you one thing here. So here we have the family, but also we have this file, which is the type catalog. Now, when you drag the family over, just like this, it's just going to load in that family into Revit. We now have just that one door. However, as I said, it's just one door. It doesn't really have any types loaded in. However, if you use a different approach, so let me hit the escape key a couple of times. Let's go back a few steps. Okay, so now if I go to the Insert tab and then go to Load Family, and I find it here on my desktop, now when I hit open, it's going to bring up the type catalog, and here we can pick out all of the types that we can load in. So for example, let's say we only want to load in the 900mm doors. Well, then I can here go into this filter this down to 900, and then I can say, okay, I want to load in this door, and this door as well. I can select all 3 of them, hit OK, and now when we open up Revit, or when we go here to the doors, as you can see, those 3 types have been loaded in. So this way you get access to more family types, and then also you get the option to pick out which ones you want to load in. You don't want to load in all of the possible types, just because that's going to present you with an issue where you have too many families loaded in and you don't really need them for the project. Moving forward to the next popular mistake, and that is working in thin lines all the time. So you have this thin lines option, and it's really useful, especially when you're zooming in quite a bit in your model, especially if you're working on a working view, so you just want to make sure that everything looks all right, and you just want to check out some of the details, and you're zooming in. It makes sense to keep the thin lines on. However, when you get everything ready, you need to make sure you turn off the thin lines so no graphical mistakes are made on your drawings. So if I turn the thin lines off, so here this looks perfectly fine right now, the thin lines are on and everything looks correct. However, once I turn off the thin lines, as you can see, we get all of these thick lines here for the bricks, and it just doesn't look right. We have this really thick line below, which I don't know why is it there, but also we can see that the rest of these do look correct. We have this hydraulic insulation that seems to be working correctly. But now if I weren't to turn on the thin lines, and if I just were to print this out, I would print out a drawing and it would look wrong, and then I would have to go back into Revit. So make sure to double check before printing, before exporting the drawings, that everything is correct when it comes to lines, and that requires turning off the thin lines. Moving forward, the third mistake, and this one is something that all of the BIM managers absolutely hate, and that is making a mistake when it comes to changing families without renaming the types. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Here we have this project that I'm working on, and let's say take a look at this wall, and it seems to be a bit too thick. We don't need such a thick structural layer for this particular wall. If I were to go here into edit type, and I just go here to structure and then go to edit, I can simply come here to the structural layer and then change this from 380 to, let's say, 250. I think this will work much better for this project. And then I can just click OK, apply, and I feel like I've done everything that I needed to do. The change is done and I'm happy. Well, what happens when we come and we need to, let's say, schedule this project? Well, if I open up the wall schedule, here we can see that we have this exterior wall, and we have an exterior wall of 580 millimeters, but the width is 450 millimeters. The reason for this is I've changed, sorry, cat is lying down on the keyboard right now. So in order to avoid making this mistake, whenever you make a change to a type just like this, make sure to go here to duplicate or rename. Well, actually in this case, I would just have to rename this, but if you're doing this from scratch, you would first go to duplicate and then create a new type with an altered dimension. So here I would just rename this, and then I would say this is 450 millimeters, click OK. OK again, and now when we go to the wall schedule, now this makes way more sense. Be careful you don't do this, you're going to get your BIM manager really mad. Moving forward, the next mistake that I used to make is loading in CAD files instead of linking them. So when it comes to inserting CAD geometry, you have a couple of options. You have the link option to link CAD, and then you have the import option to import CAD. So importing means that that file is now part of Revit and it's inside of the Revit file. And then linking is that Revit only remembered the path to that file, and it's using that path in order to, well, display that CAD file inside of your Revit project. Now, the benefit to linking is the fact that, first of all, the Revit file is not going to be that large just because it doesn't include that CAD geometry. The second reason is that you want to retain the ability to change the CAD file and then just update it inside of Revit. And then finally, the most important thing in my opinion is the fact that it doesn't pollute your Revit file. So let me show you what I'm talking about. If I go here to the Manage tab and then go to Additional Settings and open up Line Styles, here we just have some regular line styles that we get with Revit with this particular template. However, if I were to go to Insert and then go to Import CAD, just make sure to set the import units to meters, and then I'm just going to click OK. So I've basically loaded this in, and then especially in situations if I decide to explode this, so what will happen now is all of those CAD layers will pollute our Revit line styles. So if I just go here to the Manage tab again, go to Additional Settings, go to Line Styles, now what you'll notice here is when I scroll down, we're going to get these additional line styles, and these are all of the lines from CAD. Now, if you're working on a small project, this really isn't going to present you with an issue. However, let's say you're working in a large company on a large project and many people have access to this project, well, you're going to mess it up for everybody and your BIM manager is going to get really angry. The next mistake is over-constraining your Revit geometry. So what does this mean? Well, you can obviously constrain your geometry in Revit. You can lock things. So for example, if I select one of these dimensions here, you can see they're locked. All of them are locked. This one is locked. All of these are just set to equal, so they're not locked, but you can lock these as well. So basically, whenever you're adding a dimension in Revit, so let me just add a simple dimension like this and place it here. Basically, right now, this dimension is only reporting the distance between these 2 points, just a regular annotation, regular dimension. However, if I were to lock this by clicking on the lock icon, well, now this means that this dimension is actually holding the distance between these 2 walls in place. So we're just telling Revit, hold this by any means necessary. Now you can of course unconstrain it at any point, but you can also keep it constrained. Now this is really useful in certain situations where you want to constrain certain distances. For example, for this hallway, I might want to set this to a minimum distance and then lock that in place, just to make sure that other people working on this project are not going to change that because it's following certain regulations or something like that. However, you can over constrain your projects, such as I've done over here, and now if I just want to move anything, I'm just going to get a bunch of weird stuff happening. So as you can see, I just want to move this one wall and the entire project is moving with it. Now we're having this issue where these walls are interacting with the windows, and obviously this doesn't look good. So with over-constraining projects, you're going to get a lot of potential issues when you're moving things around. So be careful about that. Use constraints when it's at your advantage. However, don't overdo it because you might accidentally move something that you don't want to move, and if you don't notice it, it might be too late and they've already started building the building, and some dimension somewhere is wrong because it was constrained to something else that you have moved. The next mistake that I see often is people not purging their Revit files. So what does this mean? Well, when you're working in Revit, let's say you're working on a larger project, you might load in families that you don't end up using. You might load in 10 families and you only use 1 or 2. Now repeat that 100 times and well, that's a lot of data. Your files are going to be very large and it's going to be very inconvenient for you to send them. If you're paying for storage, it's going to get expensive, and so on and so forth. Now, you can fix this by purging your files. So what does that mean? Well, let me show you here on an example of this floor. So we have one floor in the project, this generic 150 millimeter floor. But if I go here to floors, you can see that, well, we actually have a few more floors over here and we don't really need them. Let's say I'm done with this project, or I really know that I'm not going to be using any of these other floors. Well, it makes sense to remove them from your project. So how do you do that? Well, you need to go here to the Manage tab, and then on the Settings panel, we have the Purge Unused option. So I'm just going to click on that, and here we can scroll and find floors, expand that, and here we can see all of the floors that are included. Now, you will notice that we don't really have the generic 150 millimeter floor because that one is actually being used. This is only unused. We have this one which is named similar, but it's the filled one, so it's not that exact one. Now, by default, the Purge Unused option is going to bring up all of the families that are not used. We can see we have 390 of them, and I can just purge them all by clicking OK. In this case, I'm not really sure if I'm going to be using the rest of them. However, I do know that I'm not going to be using these floors. So I'm just going to go to Check None, and then just check these floors, just like that, and we have 7 items. And now when I click OK, it's going to purge those or delete them from the project. So if I go back to architecture, go to floor, now we only have this floor, and this one seems to have been left as well, but all of the rest of the floors have been deleted and the file size has been made quite smaller. And the final mistake has to do with the material editor. So whenever you're working with materials in Revit, and let me go here to Manage, Materials, Material Browser, and now let's search for any material. Let's search for something like brick. Okay, so we have this common brick, it's very common, and let's say we want to duplicate this and create or modify this material. When I right click, I have a couple of options. I have a duplicate material with and assets, or duplicate using shared assets. Now, in the older versions of Revit, we only had duplicate, and then we could duplicate the assets. Here, by clicking on this button, here we can already duplicate the material and the asset. Now, let's say I don't do that, I only duplicate using shared assets. What will happen now is that any change that I make to the assets, so these are the assets here, any change that I make to these assets, like appearance, the change will apply to the original material, even though I didn't intend to do this. So for example here, if I decide to add a tint like this, as you can see, the other material is darker as well. If I change the tint to something like yellow, just like this. Now the other material is yellow as well, and this is not something that we want to do. So now if I get rid of that tint, everything goes back to normal. Now I can click here on duplicate material or duplicate the asset, and now if I apply that same tint, as you can see, it's only going to change the new copied material and not the original one. This one has kept its original asset. So this is really important. Sometimes you can make an accident, you create 10 materials, and any change you make to any one of those is going to affect all of them, and that's definitely something you don't want to see. And that's going to conclude this video on mistakes in Revit. Please tell me in the comment section below if you have any mistakes that you used to make in the past that you think is something you need to warn other Revit users about. Please tell me that. And of course, if you want to get access to all of my Revit project files, over 400 files so far, all of those are available on my Patreon page, which I'm going to link up in the cards above and then also down in the description of this video. Thank you for watching, guys. Make sure to check out my website, balkanarchitect.com, for more Revit courses. There I have over 120 hours of content, and I'm adding more each week. Make sure to subscribe for more videos, and also I've added a video over there that might interest you as well.